stars here. Thank you for all of the requests for more information. A number of people had questions about what will your forecast for a period of time look like? What kinds of things can you examine? Common question is, how can I tell what the influence of the place that I live is and what is its effect? So basically, if you live in a given city, how likely is that city going to affect you? So yeah, that is something we can get a lot of insight into. It's remarkable. It can be done by graph and or very detailed text description. The takeaway is you can find out what kinds of potential opportunities of different types exist in a local space. You can also tell what the likely available resources of different classes are. So example would be, given a certain city, how likely are you to have friends there? Given a certain city, how likely is your love and romance life going to flourish? What sort of business opportunities? It's an interesting diverse range that you can pick through by theme. So in this video, what I'm going to do is, we had a recent clients ask us for the summarized, annual executive version, which is basically just a number of text reports and then certain graphs. The text reports are things like, what's your purpose? What's your life purpose? And it just lays it out for you. What kind of baggage or stuff from your past is probably the most important to try to get a handle on. So it's kind of like, this is who you are, and this is where you're at, and here's what you're dealing with. Here's how to do it. But then that really focuses on a singular point or two singular points: the vertex and the anti-vertex, they're just points in the chart. They just have a representation of a certain kind of theme in your life, which is basically about purpose and who you are. But then people ask, some people ask, especially during these very volatile times, where should I be? What is the place like that I live in now? Is it supportive generally? Is it likely to be supportive in the future? And so the answer to that question is, yeah, we can do that. I'm going to step you through just an atypical report, one that we just recently did for a client, and then I'm going to just show you what the different elements are in that forecast. You do have the option to customize it in certain ways. I'll describe more about that. For example, you might want the basic forecast, and then you want a specific look at certain areas in your life. And that's something that that can be determined. So you may be in a situation where, yes, it's helpful for you to know what is your financial trend going to be like over the next year. How do you examine that? What are the different qualities in your life that are likely to be more active versus dormant? The cycles, really, right? Which of course is helpful, because then you know in advance where, if you put time, energy, and effort into, you're more likely to get a return. And where certain areas of your life there may be greater resistance, where it may or may not be advisable to try to push through the resistance to get that quality of life on board. In some cases it's better to just, if there isn't enough energy in a certain cycle of a certain quality, sometimes it's better to sort of let that rest. Other times you need to push through. And then in the report we've also got all of the transits that are happening for a year that you can look up and read the text description of. So we're going to dive into that. There's another tool that I want to see members using more, because it just gives you a greater sense of control and leverage, and that is being able to access on the fly a map, an actual world map, where you can view in real time and look at any geographic location and get a sense of what's likely if I were to go to that situation, or if I were to go to that location, what would I likely experience? So being able to pull a map up that you can move around and figure out really quickly here are some hot spots for trouble, here are some hot spots for opportunity or growth or something positive. If you're going to be making big decisions over the next year, that's a good thing to have. A client recently asked, can they find out about not just the influence of their local space, like the city that they live in, but they wanted to know, about other places they were thinking of moving. And so that can be helpful too, because at least then you can profile it. You can know in advance what's likely going to be waiting there for you. In this same forecast, we're looking at trends of different areas of life. One of the primary focuses, though, is there's essentially a business forecast. So whether you own a business or don't, if you've got a professional job, whatever, the information contained in the business report identifies the most important key cycles within the time period of a year that you should be aware of, because they're like huge peak points where something has a much greater chance of being done to your satisfaction. So that's just the intro. I'm going to now skip you through really quickly what this actually looks like, basically how to use it.
Hey folks, this is a step through of what a typical annual forecast would be. This is the executive summary or condensed version. Some clients want the full version, which is more detailed, it has finer resolution. But this gives a really good overview, and frankly, it's a superior tool to use if you need to do short and long-term planning for a lot of different areas of your life. At the top of this page, you'll find the index. You'll notice that the format of the report is fairly plain. We have both kind of a legacy, simpler format on our web pages and then a more contemporized, more fancy, kind of looking web pages. But I've kept the reporting plain on purpose because it's the contents of the information that you need to be able to use. So it's just very straightforward, and it lends itself well to being able to print some of this content off a bit more easily. So, very top of the this is the typical kind of content that comes with the reports. Usually, there's a small degree of customization in that people that want forecasts done may want a specific kind of focus. But I'm just going to step through this as sort of like a what you would generally get. So the very first one, lifestyle options and probabilities, graph for location. So what happens is we take a look at you as a person in the physical location that you're situated in, and we take a look at the likelihood of certain kinds of trends or states or experiences being present over a time period. We break it down in different ways so that you can get a quick bird's eye view as to what's likely going to be going on in your life. The first chart at the top, in this particular chart, energy present and density, and also its potency, is indicated by shades of red. So what that means basically is the darker the red, the more likely that energy is going to be present, positive, and active for the time range. So for instance, we're getting a year's overview of what's our mental state likely going to be like. If you see whites, or very light red shading, pink shading, it means that the quality doesn't have a strong energetic foundation. So that means that, let's say that you do a lot of work, using your brain, you would probably find that you'd make, the best decisions, come up with the best solutions. Your mind would be working pretty sharp during this period of time. And then you might know that periods where it's like whites or, lighter shades of red, that maybe, you shouldn't be tasking the brain with too much. And then we just have the same basic process. This is also helpful, like you'll see things like accident proneness at the bottom, especially if you're traveling short or long trips. Obviously, if there's accident proneness in a high density, you wouldn't want, to travel. So for this particular person next June, it looks like it could be problematic. Places in this particular case where there's white, that would indicate a positive thing because there's a lack of that particular energy. Friendship and family is a quality we would look at. And that's certainly good for things like, planning social get-togethers with the family and/or friends, and times when there's probably going to be a bit more solitude. We've got another graph that breaks down the trends of the year, lifestyle trends of the year, into a more complex and extended map. Now, if you've watched the previous video on mapping, you'll recall that this particular graph format was described. Basically how it worked was that you'll see that there's like a standing column of energy often happening at intervals. So the y-axis lists the qualities or the trends of those specific areas of your life, and then the green shows like a positive vitality, that likely the principle is active and it's beneficial. Red usually indicates resistance or stress. So it's basically a challenge. Sometimes challenges across different lifestyle themes can aggregate. So you'll see that they'll form clusters. Sometimes it'll be right across the table like this one. So we know that that particular time of year is probably challenging in March. So we want to take extra precaution during times of this particular kind of stress, especially when it's got a wide berth across many different qualities. You want to be aware of that coming up, prepare for it, and generally the best course of action is just to rest. Don't take risk during that time, minimize risk. And then when we see the green bands, what that means is both, in this particular case, positive energy going across many different qualities of life. But of course we have the option of picking any particular quality and just following it along on the x-axis to see how it goes. Because there will be differentiation. So for example, in this time range at the beginning of the chart, we see that it's horizontal bands forming in strange clusters and not vertical columns, unlike the 3 vertical columns that we have coming after. So in this particular case, we know that although there may be stress in certain areas, we've got positive energy in very specific parts of life where we could channel our energy and experience a positive outcome. And so this is obviously good for planning. Even when it comes down to, like, say, speculation, money gains, investment, we would know that this is not a good time to take risk. It's a good time to cut back on expenditures. So that's those simple heads-up view charts. This is basically just one of the charts that comes with the report, which is your natal and the transits. And so the transits are basically the outer ring is what's happening in the sky, and then the inner ring is what's happening, the inner ring is your natal chart, and we look at the relationships between what's going on in the sky currently and then what's going on in your natal chart. And then we'll take a look also at things like the trend graphs for these themes over time as a bar graph, like an ascending bar graph. So in this particular case, we're looking at the financial trends for a year, and the important takeaway here, as also described in the previous video, is that basically use this as a time energy management tool. Surface area inside of a graph where you've got high peaks basically usually indicates the duration and strength of the influence. So, I mean, we basically take a look at the height as the intensity or amplitude, but it's the height plus the surface area that gives sort of like the overall strength. Usually in this particular kind of trend graph, a 5 on the y-axis indicates moderate. And so a person with any person that's got a financial trend at that 5 level is usually doing average, okay? So in this particular case, we see that there's some good, regular intervals of financial vitality, and it's got, a pretty good height. When we see that there's a declination, a downwards, curve, or if we see like there's an extended plateau where it's, at the baseline or close to the baseline. We know in advance that we want to curtail expenditures, be more frugal. We're in a hold position. When we see that there's growth or a spike in financial well-being, then on the ascension of the curve, on the upper part of the curve, these could be better times for risk, better times for speculation. And then we break a number of these qualities down, additional qualities not listed, a number of these not listed previously, some of them listed previously, but we want to graph them together in related themes over the span of the year, because this gives us another way to kind of get us a picture, an understanding of what is the story that's playing out in my life this coming year. Where should I be putting my time and energy? So we see that for this person, on the x-axis legend, we have red is mental acuity, and we see an enormous buildup of mental strength during this time range, which is basically right around the end of the first week of September, getting a really good height, strong, strong duration, and that goes right till probably close to the middle of the last week of October. That's a pretty good trend there, actually. Athletic performance spikes at regular intervals, and it goes pretty high. And so, that would be a good time, to plan in advance. If there's something that you have to be really physically active and exert yourself, do it then. And then, I'm not going to go through all the different description of all the different qualities here. I just want to give you a quick overview. You can find the link for this forecast sample in the comments section below, so you can look at all of this in depth. Obviously your chart would look very different from what we're seeing here, because this is custom tailored, for an individual person. Now the life trends one, athletic performance. In this particular case, we also just did a simple line graph. Sometimes when we do the 3D graphs for some charts, it gets a bit busy, so we want to be able to delineate, where those energies are actually forming. And then, this is another one for the same time period: emotional sensitivity, romance and sexuality, physical sensitivity. Physical sensitivity can sometimes correspond with times of accident proneness. There can be overlap, but it doesn't have to mean that or go that direction. It can also be probably a good time for for therapy. A good time for anything where the body needs to be receptive. Maybe it's learning, maybe it's meditation, maybe it's some kind of healing process. Let me take a look at the next graph. We see friendship and family, relaxed party, vacation, solitude, withdrawal. So in this particular situation, we can see where the person is probably going to have less social interaction. It might be just a mood that they're in. They want to be more introspective, or it could be just circumstance. There's just not that many people around in proximity. But we can also see, when's a good time to basically have fun. And so in this particular chart, there's a really good opportunity for a good time, relaxation towards next year, starting in the spring and lasting quite a while. That's going to be a good time. And then we see where the support and presence of friendship and family comes in, and that's pretty regular throughout. That's actually a really good, especially right in August, there's a good potential for that. And I should point out, these tend to be potentials. Often these potentials do manifest. In other words, there's something happens. But there are situations where there could be a really strong potential for a certain quality of life. Circumstantially, you may not be in a situation to pursue it, enjoy it, do something about it. Your attention may be called elsewhere, but the potential is still there. So here we've got athletic performance, drive, ambition, work, accident proneness. You can see that there's potential for accidents here. Again, if it goes above the 5, we want to pay attention to it. but it's not really a huge big deal, but it is somewhat regular. So there's something going on. It's not super strong, but there's something that could be problematic. You know, it could be something as simple as just, you know, in the environments, there might be something to slip on for some reason on a regular basis there. Now this is a house graph, and in this particular case, this report was tailored to needs the clients likely wanted in place, one of which was 11th house, and so we'll map energies on a house basis over a period of time. Interesting thing about these particular graphs is that sometimes when you zoom in on a smaller time period, say between November and December, you'll still get the basic same formation. It will change somewhat structurally when you zoom, specifically in that details that we might not see on a farther zoomed out view might not reveal. So an example might be, in these particular kinds of graphs, you can have red spikes that go below the baseline, which usually indicate stress or resistance, but we may not see it at this scale. So sometimes when we zoom in at smaller scales, we'll catch things. And on the more, you know, extensive executive reports, like the full annual reports, you know, usually what happens is these areas are analyzed at a different zoom scale because, you know, there's business people or executives that want to know for sure, you know, what they can expect for, you know, a period of time, such as a month. Here we're just doing the year, but we can tell even at the zoom scale, even though we're out a little ways, that there really isn't, you know, any problematic areas. If we zoom out this far, even to a year, if there was something that was really significant that we'd want to know about, it would likely show. So mostly it's pretty good. And we see that there's a lot of support and actualization because 11th house, you know, involves actualization right between November, well, I guess pretty much for the month of November. And then we break that down into a bar line graph, just again for a quick visual reference. Where is the energy the densest? You can see the energy is densest here. Status of health, wellness, work relation to workers. This is the 6th house. And again, we've got the same zoom scale. Now, in this particular case, we can see that it's pretty good for most of the year, but we do see like a red dip happening right around the middle of June. So we want to be careful of that. And when we look at this chart, we just know that it's a 6th house issue that's going to be undergoing stress. And potentially that could be the status of health, you know, what's happening with the body. But it can also be, you know, if you're self-employed or if you're working in an office, this could also manifest as just trouble or problems with employees. All right. So I'm just going to go back to the table of contents. When we look at the trend charts, that's mostly life qualities. We also have business trends. And that's you know, the potential for success, you know, good fortune, mental sharpness, but we also put accident proneness in there, just so that we can get a sense of, you know, where might risk be in relation to effort being made to achieve success. Why is that important? Well, you'll notice here that we've got mental acuity with the purple band, and we've got accident proneness. So the accident proneness with the mental sharpness is corresponding. So there's something really dynamic going on with the mental process, and there's also a potential for fortune there. So to my mind, the way that I would view that is this is a very volatile time. Probably has a lot of potential for good, but there's also some risk in there coming from the accident proneness. And underneath that, we have the business forecast, and that's the business report. And what happens here is that the key transits throughout the given year are detailed. And what you're looking for is the timeline that the influence is occurring within, and then you also are looking for the intensity. Now what that basically means is that in this particular report, a key number of primary trends are documented, and then they're described, outlining things again like hazard, how can problems be managed, what can you expect, what needs to be done. But the lower the intensity number, the less strength the influence has in this report. So what we're really looking for, often is where's the high score. A decent score would be about a 3. But when you get basically a 4 or up, it's quite strong. And that just basically means, you want to pay attention, put a lot of attention, energy, and effort into understanding, what that transit trend is about. And you want to also be aware of when it's occurring. So you want to be prepared in advance to, if you can, capitalize. And this is quite positive. This is quite a positive influence. So that's. I'm not going to go through all of this here, but it just breaks it down. What are basically the transits and trends? How strong is it? What's the description of it? I'm just going to go back here. I'm going to just take a quick look at the trend charts. I'm going to come down to the ones that we were looking at before. And I want to show you, in this particular situation, how the change of scale, zooming in and narrowing the timeline, lets us telescope into the fine resolution and granularity of the dates. So this is the 1-year chart, and again, this is for the 6th house. You see here that there's a potential problem happening within June. So what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in by scale, and we're going to look at June itself. So we see now that the timeline is expanded. We actually see that energy broken up into a series of clusters. And we can see that there's probably these 2 dates, because they have the lowest dip and they have the greatest surface area. It's probably going to be the most problematic times that we'd want to know about. It'd be great to know about all of these, but then it's again a matter of the time it takes to just document that. So let's take a look at this date here, zoomed up. So we're going to take a look at June 17th. So this is our month table, and we're going to take a look at this time period here. We're going to zoom that in, and then this is the day, basically the day up until the 17th. The way that we read this one, you'll notice that the structure is different, but what we're seeing here in the top horizontal band is the energy, state, and dynamic of the individual. So the green being they're in a positive, vital, balanced state. The red is they're probably under stress. There's probably potentially like a weakening or a loss of vitality, possibly more error prone. Now the second horizontal band is the collective. What's likely going on in the general mindset of the people that live in that particular location. And so collectively what you would notice is that there would be hiccups, burps, challenges whenever there's a red band here. When you see just like a red squiggle line, it's like it is generally negative, but it's not super strong. When you see a green line, it's not super strong, but when you see a green line with a band, then it's a positive time. And basically the way you want to use these charts is you want to line up the top horizontal band, which is your personal energy. You want to see it synchronize with the collective local energy, because when you have a green band representing the current state of yourself, and you have a green band representing a positive state of the local collective, things tend to go better when those synchronize. When there's red in either or, there's probably going to be some kind of challenge. Likewise, what can happen sometimes is you can have red bands in both, where they line up. And you want to pay special attention to that because unlike when we have a green band synchronizing to the collective from the personal, if we have red bands from the personal to the collective synchronizing, that's a particularly bad time. We're far more prone to error. We'll take a look also at the other day, which was around between the 23rd to the 25th. So we're scaling in on that, zooming in, and we can again see, where is the occurrence in the vitality of the person fluctuating? When is there a problem with the collective? There aren't any significant red bands lining up here, but we can see that in the personal constitution, there's a bit of a minor red blip, and there's a very strong collective red blip. So that would be a time that you would, again, want to minimize risk. Don't expect much to be done during that time. This kind of synchronization makes for things like traffic jams. We also did 12th house. This is a good general choice for most users because it basically shows, this would be the kind of problem in life that it's a serious problem. And it usually has to do with a blind spot of some kind, either in ourselves or a blind spot in the perception of the environment or other people. And we can catch a significant problem in advance and finding out when it's going to occur and then detailing it. So here we are, we're zooming in again on this particular timeline, and we're just finding out when are these energies actually happening. And then we're going right down to the the day zoom scale, blowing it up. Now, why would we want to graph these out past just knowing the when? Well, when we take a look at these trends, for instance, let's just come back here for a second. I'm going to come down to look at the 6th house. We're going to look at June 23rd to 25th. So in this particular case, we know the when of a stress occurring. Now we want to know what that stress is. And so the way that we do that is we go to the text description and we just scroll down to the date entry. And there's quite a lot of content in here, like there's a year's worth of content. So I'm going to just scroll down until I'm down to June. I'm going to find out where is that energy coming from. And I'm looking for, this is the planetary configuration, and then this is the duration. And I'm looking to see where the stress is coming from. And probably this is a good candidate right here, June 26th. And also this one as well. So in this particular case, Mars squares Uranus. It starts on the 25th, goes to the 28th. This can be accidents. And usually the nervous system is high strung when it's Mars square Uranus. And this can be, basically it can certainly result in things like loss or damage, car accident, that sort of thing. But it details basically what the nature of the influence is. Now, the other thing that's really cool is that a number of these text entries, when you look up, because you want to look up like the peak trends as well, you want to know about the problem dates, but you're going to have times where a trend that you're interested in is very strong and has good volume, and you're going to want to know what is that about, because if you know what that's about in advance, then you can take action to maximize return on it. So in this particular case, we've got a really good influence between Jupiter and Mercury. This is the date range that it's happening, and then it gives you a description of what that's about. And then we come down to, well, if it's going to be a positive outcome, what would it look like? If it's going to be a negative outcome, what would that look like? And then it gives suggestions and remedies. Basically, if there's a problem, what's the best solution? What should you do about it? So what that means is this extensive text description of all these trend points is documented, and all you have to do is, in most cases, just find the date that you're interested in. So, here's June 15th, June 17th. It looks like there could be something problematic there. We find the points on the graph, and then we just go look it up. We just go take a look at what's actually happening there, and we know in advance, what needs to be done. So let's take a look at what's going on there. Ooh, yeah. So Mars conjunct Saturn lasts about 3 days, and that's frustration. But it's interesting because it's sandwiched between some really positive influence that should more than make up for it. But it tells us, what the issue is. And fortunately, a quincunx isn't like a super horrible aspect. We also see another challenging one, Venus square Pluto, in the same time range, June 17th to 18th. And that's basically, it's like an intensity of emotion, and it's sometimes an unpleasant intensity of emotion, often related to, another person. Fortunately, again, that doesn't last very long. But that's how we use those graphs. And we also have a report on what the current place you live in, how does it influence you, and how strong is that influence. So for this particular person, and just to give an idea, if you have a score of 100 for any of these qualities, that's usually considered to be good. It's not super good, but if you have any value that's between 80 to 100, that's reasonable. When it starts to go below, below 75, it starts to get challenging, where the influence is just not present. So in this particular case, the fixed trend would tend to be that this person would have really significant friendship and family close by, and they would do well in their job, and they would be very creative and in touch with culture there. When you see low numbers like the zeros there, what that tends to mean is that there isn't any energetic support astrologically much there for that experience generally. And so this person would benefit, if they wanted to experience these qualities, if they were situated in a different geographic location, because if they were in a different city, a good distance away, these numbers can change dramatically. And it's interesting because the entire planet can essentially be scanned to find out, where the best hotspots are. But it's like, imagine if you're a single person and you're looking for love and romance. Believe it or not, sometimes you can find areas on the globe where that score can be literally as high as 600. So that's, if you think 100 is good, then you can get 6 times that. The same thing with, optimism and opportunity, etc. So, but what happens in this particular report is we actually detail what you will experience there insofar as the aspects the planets form and the qualities associated with them, which will be a list of the positive, neutral, and also challenging things. And it gets into detail as to the kinds of people that you may tend to run into. Is it a harmonious experience? Are there problems there? If there are problems, then it will show it. But you'll also get a rank magnitude in the form of asterisks to the left, showing what the strength of that is. And what that means basically is the more asterisks there are, the stronger the influence will be, and the more often you would likely tend to experience it. So if there's a low asterisk score, that would tend to mean that it's not very strong, and you would not tend to experience it very often, because these will switch on and off, kind of like a circuit. Like it's not common for all aspects for any person in a given location to always be active and always at full strength. Like there will be fluctuation over time. It's just that when we look at the asterisks, it tells us how much we can expect that influence to be present and how strong it will be. And in some cases where there is no asterisk, it just means that it's a general influence that's probably there most of the time, but it's light. It's still noticeable, but it's light. In addition to that, there's also an environmental therapy report, which basically talks about how can you get the most out of the environment and use it in a direction for healing and self-improvement. So essentially what happens is the content it basically gives you an idea as to how much that environment will support you to becoming a whole and better person. And specifically in the sense of here's what you can expect. Like as an example, we have a novile forming between the ascendant and Jupiter. We see that it's a good place for healing therapies, recuperation, relaxation, etc. So we could expect that to be a general experience that would be present in this particular location. But all of these entries are related, to what you could experience or what you could expect to experience, potentially therapeutically from a location. That's obviously important if you think to yourself, like, especially if you're going to relocate, if you're going to move someplace, how is this place going to, actually affect me on a physical, emotional level? What can I count on, being able to, how can I cope effectively in the environment with whatever stress is there, but feel like the environment is supporting me in a specific way, hopefully in a regenerative way. So that's detailed as well. There's actually quite a lot of detail that we go into there. This is another location. It's more in depth. So the third part of the locational report really goes into, like, the previous reports are summaries that you can use for just a quick reference. What can I expect from this place? But then following those two previous ones, like just after the therapeutic one, it's almost like a short essay form of what you can expect per aspect. So it really gets into the detail there. And if you're living at a volatile time and you want to have a really grasp on what you can expect from your environment, yeah, this is pretty helpful. Best dates. We often provide an electional component to the executive summary annual forecast. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at a specific house and what we're deriving here is the best and most powerful dates for a given focus over the course of the year, and then we list them in a table. Usually the way that this ranking system works is that you want to look for positive values that are at least on, roughly about 300 or more. 300 is okay, 500 is better. When you get close to 1,000 or higher, those are really good dates. So you can usually count on, in this particular case, we're looking at self-actualization, personal wellness, anything that's, first house related. And these are quite powerful times. And so the best way that you use that is you simply note, the date and the day. It's probably beneficial, like if there's a day that's particularly important, that we do a zoom in scale to find out what the exact positive times are. But in this particular case, we have a table that lists all the powerful days for the point of interest throughout the month. And then that's just ranked in descending magnitude. We also take a look at the negative times. What are the worst dates over the year for this particular interest? Obviously, when we get into, say, a negative, like this particular time is going to be a little bit challenging. Like 2200, like that's that's a strong rank for that particular day. So that day would not be advised to pursue that interest. You'd want to really take it easy on that. And we looked at primary problem dates. Times 12th house. Vertex is your sense of basically destiny, what your purpose in life is. But it also includes the anti-vertex, which has to do essentially with, the past, things that you're managing from the past. And the vertex works a bit like the nodes of the moon, because the vertex and anti-vertex are on an axis like a north and south node. But the takeaway of this is that basically it lists what you should be focusing on to fulfill your purpose. It describes how to use the vertex, like the intro part of this report. It just basically tells you what it is, how to use it, but then it goes right into the aspects. And it's the aspects that you're interested in, because that's what's describing who you are, what your life purpose is, how you should be managing your life purpose in relation to different focuses. And it's also describes areas of vulnerability, challenge, blind spots, bad habits, things that you probably would want to fix in your life specifically. It'll outline your strengths. It will tell you, where you gifted. Where should you be investing your time and energy? So if you're in a job or a profession, and you go through reading your vertex and you find that you're not really getting opportunities of fulfillment in relation to your vertex, then this can show you where that needs to change. Vertex also gives you insights into who you actually are, like your sense of self, like what fulfills you. It's a pretty good report to use. I've benefited from this a lot myself. All the clients that have had this done are super happy to have it. It's like the ability to almost hold a mirror up, behind your mind, and then take a look at what's actually going on behind the scenes. And it's also really good for self-temperaments, like self-tempering. Midheaven, how high you can reach. So if you pursue, a goal that's in line with your purpose, what can you expect generally, to be able to achieve from that. The vertex also talks about what makes you feel secure. What do you need to have in place, to not be anxious, to feel like you're making progress, to feel like everything is right in your world. The descendant part of the vertex, it shows how you tend to treat other people, and it goes into that in detail. And this is actually really important if you want to harmonize through relating. All of us have problems, right? Everybody makes mistakes when we're relating to others. Sometimes the mistakes are repeat ones, sometimes they're ones we get a handle on really quick. But here it's like it's all laid out. It details it. You're going to want to make sure that you're on your game for sure this next year. And one of the ways that you make sure you're on your game is figuring out, where the strengths and challenges are and how you relate to other people. It's going to be important to work with other people this year. Spiritual development, there's decent comments on basically, what areas of life potentially do you need to focus on, to just improve your spiritual life. So that's the overview. I also wanted to show you a couple other things to go over. Long-term key transits. This is basically just a section where I've pulled some content. I've just put it down. There are like some key points to be aware of. Your interest in life by category house definition. So when we generate graphs for a specific interest, one of the ways that we're doing that is by house. And so houses have different themes that occur in your life. So there's 12 houses. Each house will address, things like a role or, a position that you experience or that you experience from others. So, seventh house would usually be related to a partnership. Could be, like a wife, girlfriend, husband, boyfriend, business partner. But we can find out, let's say you're in a situation where there's a particular area of your life that you want to examine and just get a sense as to what the potential unfoldments will be. Like, what can you expect as potential change in an area of life? Well, there's a number of references that I've compiled, super helpful. There was a great site that unfortunately went offline. I can't pronounce this. Mail Godefroy. This was a small group of people that did an amazing job just documenting, detailing, basic and more complex subjects of astrology. And so I've attempted to salvage as much as I could off the Wayback Machine. You can access this still directly from the Wayback Machine. What I've done is I've just put in some links and some surface pages that will let you get there. But this is one of the ones that we can find. We just scroll down on this main reference page and we can find house definitions, which takes us to this. And then we just, if we want to know what areas of our life, if we want to know what areas of our life to examine, we need to find out which house it is. So we can take a look at the houses. In this particular case, it just breaks it down. Basic meanings of the houses. So we just look at the qualities, the descriptions of what we can expect under the category of house 1. So how vital are you likely to be over a period of time? If we wanted to know about vitality, then we would, in our forecast, graph that, right? Just the same way that we had the trend charts will show a good chunk of that. Certainly in these particular charts, what we're doing here is we're using kind of like the musical chord type approach. We're looking at planetary aspects instead of houses. But when we get down to these charts, this is 11th house. So we're graphing that over time. And if we want to know what the 11th house is, then we just scroll down and it tells us it's, basically hope, friends and friendship, hopes and wishes. It's essentially fulfillment. But it just basically shows you, what does each house address? And you want to know what's the likely state of that particular quality over a period of time. And then we graph that and we find out, when is that most supported and, when is that weak in the white bands, when it dips down, it's on the decline. We can zoom into areas that are problematic and then get a lot of information on that. This particular link has just so much information. It's a good reference, an awesome go-to. So I wanted to show you that because that's included also just as a reference link. Now the last part I want to show you guys is a tool I've been using for some time. It's really quite remarkable. I've got an awesome relationship with the developer of this tool. We've worked on some projects in the past. He just does an amazing job. There's other tools out there that can be used to do essentially the same thing. I've talked about the free tool that you can use. But what separates this particular tool from all the other ones that I've used is that it's really the best. I haven't seen anything that comes even close to its ease of use and frankly just like the number of features that it has. It's just amazing. There is no other map tool out there that can perform anywhere close to this level. Certainly not the free tools. What you basically have here is you have the ability to, go anywhere in the world and look at how planetary energies are forming dynamically. But you can also take a look at your natal chart. So when you have planetary lines on a map that are related to your natal chart, these lines show basically where the planets, specific planets, were crossing at the time of birth. And essentially, this forms a consistent, static, fixed circuit, like a pattern in your body. So these lines never change. And the basic premise is when you're using an astro mapping type tool is that you're working in layers of energy. The fundamental layer is the natal planetary lines, and that these would be trends that you would expect to generally be present most of the time in your life. It's just basically, it's a foundational layer. Now, having said that, I'm just going to change this to a thin line. Having said that, we still have constant changing dynamic motion of the planets, every day, right? There's a change every day. So I'm looking at now the map where, say, if I wanted to, here's my Venus line. So if I scroll in, my Venus line is where I would expect to probably encounter things like romance, fun, lighthearted, experiences, basically joy. I mean, I should be experiencing joy there. Creativity. But what's interesting is that I actually did spend some time, I'm Canadian, I live in Canada, but I did spend 5 years in this area here in Victoria. It was beautiful, I loved it, and it was never a challenge finding, like a romantic partner. They weren't perfect relationships. There were certainly they certainly had their share of stress. But as far as just like the average day-to-day quality of experience in a romantic life, it was pretty nice there overall. Like, when times were good, they were pretty good. And my guess is, and I've gone back, a couple of times since, and it always feels like that energy is still present for me when I'm there. But having said that, you still have to anticipate change over time, because if we turn on transit lines, now this is an old map for me, so it's not current right now. We have transit lines for each month, but let's just say in the year 2020, I want to take a look at where were those lines falling. I'm going to make those a little bit, I think those are the thick ones, yeah. Okay. So we're going to make the natal lines thin, so I can easily tell the difference. So now I'm working with 2 layers of information. I can see where my fixed static lines are because they're the thin lines, and I can see where the transits for a given time period are running. Now when they cross or they intersect or they're close to each other, that will change the nature of the influence. So for example, while I still have my Venus line close to Victoria as a fixed static line, the dynamic actual place in that area is now has Pluto very close by, and you'll notice that my natal Pluto line, how I was born at that point in time, Pluto was actually fairly close, to Vancouver Island, and certainly if I were to scroll up, here we've got Pluto transit current, energy of the time crossing the natal line. So that probably would be a pretty tough place for me to be at that point in time. It probably wouldn't be a very happy place to be. It would be pretty intense. And certainly Vancouver during that time, you can see that the Pluto line is just hovering right over it. So Vancouver was actually having a pretty rough time of it back in 2020 during that month. But the point basically is you now have 2 layers of information that you can use to get a pretty good handle as to what you could expect energetically. So here, for example, in the United Kingdom in 2020, for me, transiting, I've got both the Mars and Pluto crossing in Britain. So I probably wouldn't have wanted to have been on the border between England and Scotland at a time, it would have been probably pretty jarring and dangerous, like for me. But transiting, I can see like London probably would have been better for me. You know, Southeastern Europe, there's the romance here. That probably would be, you know, like a lot of creativity, a lot of fun. But if we take this the transit lines off, I'm just going to reset that. If we take the transit lines off, I can also take a look at something called the geodetics. Now the geodetics, this shows me that the planetary lines of force for the collective energy, what's basically happening on the planet. And certainly, you know, again, you will see patterns forming between geodetics and transits and natal lines. So I can actually work with 3 different layers here. Let's make the geodetic lines really thick. And we'll make the transit lines, we'll say December. Go to options, I'm going to make that normal. And then I'm going to come to natal lines, put those on, I'm going to make those thin. So now I've got 3 layers of information. And now I've got a very specific, I see all the combined energies. And that's awesome, because when we have more than one planetary line, if they're benevolent, then basically what that means is, you know, things like your vitality, opportunity will go up huge in those areas. So, you know, especially when you get down into dense clusters, I mean, it can be a fairly complex story. And in that particular case, then what you want to do is you want to have an understanding as to what each of these lines mean. If you hover over a line and you click on it, it'll give you a description. So I've just clicked on the Saturn line, and it tells me exactly the quality of experience specifically that I would have, most likely, most potentially, at that location. Now the other thing is planetary lines have a radius of influence. So I'm going to reset that, get rid of those lines, and I'm going to turn geodetic lines on. And here it's like this is the energy for everyone. So there's a fairly powerful Jupiter IC line coming down the mid-eastern states. And I'm going to say pick a location here, St. Louis. Say that's a place of interest. I go set distance circle, come down, click on that little thing there, clear set distance circle, and then I click on St. Louis. So what that does is it places a radius of influence. So and what we do is we take a look at, where is that planetary line intersecting the points in the circle. And because the inner circles are more powerful, the farther that these are increments. I believe these are of 50 miles in the inner circle, and then it doubles as it goes out or it grows. We can see that, obviously, from this circle to this circle, the influence is waning. We've got a tight circle stack just hovering over St. Louis. Essentially, by this circle, the influence starts to wane quite a bit. I think this is about roughly 250 miles, and so the influence would start weakening at that perimeter. This is a tool that's really good for all kinds of things, from trying to figure out places that you might want to visit, vacation, move to, but it's also an amazing forensic tool to find out where you can do things like, marketing, where you can engage in business, what kinds of transactions you might have. If you were a writer and you wanted to sell a book, where on the planet would I, have probably the best opportunities for that? If I wanted to plan like a vacation or a getaway, what might be the best place to go? And I can look at it from different perspectives. I can use the perspective of combined layers, my natal, my transits, and look at things like geodetics. But this also does progressions. I'm not going to go into progressions too much here, but progressions would basically show us a much longer term view. In other words, if I want to look at transit lines, this shows short-term influences, and that would be roughly within a year, generally. If I wanted to, let's see here, just going to set that in. If I wanted to make decisions based on longer-term influences, then I might use progressions, because that basically means that in most cases the nature of the energy would move slower or be more static. One of the things that I've done a number of times with my associate who develops this wonderful product is we'll have conversations, we'll turn the geodetic lines on just so that we can see, where are the planetary influences now. And what we do is we pay attention to what's happening in the news, because usually what you'll find is that the nature of the news that's coming out often clocks geographically. In other words, where is the news coming from? If there's an event happening, like in the real world, there's like a volcano in Asia someplace, or if there's political unrest happening in certain countries. As an example, here we have the Mars line, the descendant line, running straight through Africa and also parts of Spain, and you'll see here it's crossing Uranus and Pluto. This is very close to Portugal. So that makes me wonder, what might have been happening during that time. But let's take a look at, this is geodetics for a point in the past. I was using it as an example because if we follow, for example, the Mars line down, you might often see things like political stress, some kind of strife there. But this friend of mine also uses, there's free access to his geodetic service. So, anybody can use the geodetic service. And I'll provide access to that to members that have bought the forecast webinars, or if you get the annual forecast, certainly this free version will be included, but the free version doesn't include all of the bells and whistles of like the natal lines, geodetic, progressions, transits. One other thing I should cover here too, and I don't know if I have this enabled on this particular map, but I'm going to find out here. I'm going to zoom in on a city in Canada. This has been a real treat working with this. This is an additional method that my friend has built into this. This is the local space lines. And it may not be active in this one. I think I put it in a different map. But what you would do is, I'll try to show you guys how the local space map works another time. He's got one where it's activated. I think in this particular version I don't have it active. But you would just click on that map, and then you would have spokes that radiate out from the place that you've clicked. And then that tells you where in a given city you can expect things to go well for you, which is just amazing. It's like there's different ways to pick the right location, to drop that down. But again, I'll talk about that in a later video. But here we are with the current geodetics, and we can take a look at what's happening now in the sky and find out where is the turbulence in the world and where is the peace in the world. So recently I had a client ask me about how can she find out if she's going to move, which cities she should go to. Certainly using a tool like this is really helpful because it gives us a snapshot of what's happening in the terrain at that point. So if you were, for instance, if you're living in Chicago and there isn't at the moment a whole lot of planetary energy force dynamics happening there, but you want to move, well, if you wanted to, say, move to someplace in the mid-states, like the Midwest states, or if you wanted to go to the West Coast, you could see what the astrological energies were like. Here in Sacramento, for instance, San Francisco, San Jose, we've got Saturn situated. That probably would not be a fun place to be if you're looking to move someplace where you're going to be able to relax and take it easy. Collectively, that's just not the energy that's happening there right now. You could go to Wyoming. Wyoming actually looks like it might be pretty nice generally. We've got Jupiter close to a place called Casper, the Moon, and I believe that's Mercury. Yeah. So you'd meet intelligent people, intelligent, emotional people that were good-natured. But we can also take a look at, say, the Mars line. Mars is not negative or positive. We might see it more challenging where and if it, crosses other lines like Pluto, Saturn. But it would certainly be active there. So South Dakota, probably really vital. I mean, it's really, really going. But sometimes Mars can also indicate, stress, anger, tempers, that kind of thing. But when we look at news reports and we correspond them to what's happening on the map, it's a real amazing strategic tactical tool. So for example, here's Pluto, and Pluto here at this point is on the descendant, so it would be pretty tough dealing with other people there right now. And we know that Paris, France in general, has a lot of turbulence. There's a lot of protests going on, a lot of upset people, certainly in London. It's crossing into Manchester. I'm just going to zoom out here a little bit more. We'll just do a quick scan across the map here. I wonder what's going on in Australia. Yeah, so Western Australia, this is Uranus and Pluto. They're fairly close to each other. Yeah, there's probably right around Perth, Pluto and Uranus. So probably there's going to be a lot of unrest there. And, we've also got the Sun at midheaven, something positive maybe going on shortly for Adelaide. Melbourne's not doing so great, and we don't see any turbulent current planetary dynamics, but if I were to guess, I'd say that if we turn transits on, for the birth of the city, there's probably some pretty harsh things going on right over Melbourne right now. So that's, this particular tool, the geodetics, this is something I recommend, members and clients get. It's a wonderful tool. Frankly, I think it's the best of its kind out there. And usually, my buddy, like if he makes a map for anyone, he usually charges $150, and I think it's for 1 year. But he's cut me a deal, and he's told me that in my group, he's willing to do up to 6 of these maps for people at a rate of $50 each, which is huge. I mean, that's like a $100 discount. And it looks like my local space came on here. This is what a local space map looks like. Yeah, that's awesome. So you remember I was talking to you about local space, where you can go into a city, blow it up, and then find out how the planetary energies are partitioned in that city for you personally. I think that's what's going on here. Looks like it. Which basically means you can look at any area of the city and find out, the kinds of places you should stay away from, the kinds of places you're likely to have, positive, good experiences. I'm just going to reset this. So if you're in a situation where you feel like you need solid, forecasts of probabilities for life over the next year, I would suggest that you get the annual summary, the executive summary. And I think that what you might want to do is, if you're going to bother getting the summary, really consider getting this tool. Because I think what you're going to find is, like the value of $50 for a $150 tool, that's frankly the best, of its type out there. It's going to be pretty meaningful, especially if you've got important things to plan, especially if you're thinking about moving. I mean, for myself, when I take a look at the geodetics, if I were going to be moving around to Canada, I'd want to have a pretty good idea as to what I could expect the environment to be. I mean, it's just, this free version, if you get the annual executive summary forecast, I'll make sure that you get access to the free version of the geodetics. But that's probably something you're going to want to play around with. Obviously Seattle is so close to the Pluto line, you probably wouldn't want to be spending much time there. But if you like the free version and you feel that it's got obvious apparent value, but you want to get the extra information of the natal progression and transit lines, so you can look at that multi-layered view, which is the best way to do it strategically and tactically, frankly, then just let me know. He does these manually, so he has to design these maps for the individual. It does take him time. That's why he charges $150, and it's very unique. But like I say, if you want to get this degree of strategic mapping done, it's going to be a third the cost. And if you want that, there's no markup. I'm not making anything off this. He's a good guy. He cares about my bottom line. He asked me if I wanted to mark it up, and I just said no. Let's just give it to them, for that price. So it's a huge discount, and that's if you purchase the annual executive forecast summary. And so if you just want to get the annual executive forecast summary, access to the free geodetic only version will be provided too. So that is the essence of, when a lot of people wrote in and asked, they saw the last few videos, they were wondering, what kind of information does it come with, what can I expect from it. That's it. There's quite a lot of content, but the point is, making sure that you utilize this information correctly. There's a few things I didn't go into here. One of the extra tables that we see is another view of the year where it shows planetary stresses specifically. So we have like a waveform at the bottom where we can see the red dips, but we can monitor every single planet's state over the course of the year, which gives us extra insight into what the nature of the problem is and its duration. So in this particular situation, between basically December and January, it's going to be probably not, it's not going to be so lighthearted. It's going to require, just sort of like sticking to things. But then there's a lot of relief coming in for that stress from other places. And part of that's coming in through communication, the mind. There's a lot of green activity happening here, relatively consistently in clusters. And there's also quite a few individual green clusters happening where there is still, the Venus planet is strongly charged. And interestingly, this person has Saturn in a positive state quite a lot, and that would likely indicate there's something good about foundation. There's a stableness there. There's like an inner strength there. So we graph that different ways. We've got the same table with a quick lookup sum at the bottom so we can quickly find where the stresses are. We also map for the year what particular formations are happening, like ones that are of specific interest. Some of these are astrology terms like finger of God, but we're just basically tracking really important aspects. And then we also see, where are the energy dynamics forming by sun, and we see that Capricorn is strongly indicated here for a period of time, as is Pisces, which would give the indication that there is likely a strong focus on a serious spirituality. Probably like the, if I were to guess, I'd say it's probably something like a consistent spiritual meditative focus, focus on higher things. So that really constitutes, for people that wanted to know, what happens when you get like the annual forecast. Those are the parts, and if you look at the comments section below, you can get access to this entire document. You can just go through it at your leisure. If you have questions, just email me. But I hope that helps. That covers everything that a person would want in their annual forecast. Doc Stars, over and out.